design?
Yeah, I finished it and a teacher, well, 5 teachers get the question,
Okay.
but because of their schedule, they told me that today they will give it back to me.
Okay.
Only teacher Flor Zacarías, she gave it to me, and she's like, no, she agreed with the possible
Okay.
process of the data collection. Also, I create an observation sheet, but I don't know if it is like adequate, and I send it to you.
Recently?
A minute ago.
A minute ago. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. In Google Drive?
Yeah. The thing is that I had some problems with my computer and I cannot uh, work with it.
Okay, we'll pull it up here. See if I can. Is this it?
Oh yes.
Okay. At the top, I would include some sort of heading, so just a
Mhm.
basic heading with
Yes.
the name of the university and a title, observation sheet, and so yeah. So you're going to have one or two groups probably that you're going to be
Yes.
observing, correct?
Yes, teacher.
So my question is here, thinking of an observation sheet that you're going to use when you're physically in the classroom, are you going to be able to observe both groups at the same time? Because you can observe the whole class, but I'm wondering if how well you can observe, looking at the chart here, can you observe and get the information you need to adequately...
Only from one.
I'm
At
sorry?
the time, from one team.
Right. So what I would do, perhaps you can use this chart as a way of analyzing the recordings and your own personal observations from your field notes. But think of it in terms of observing how the teacher's positioning.
Also, I draw at the bottom a square, an empty square, in which I want to, well,
Okay, to describe where the teacher walks around.
the
Okay.
different teams and.
All right. So what I'm thinking here, do the students respond to each other's ideas? Do the students ask questions with each other? All these questions, how do they, opening mark, okay, how do they clarify ideas? This type of information that you have currently in your observation sheet, I think, would help you when you analyze the recordings and when you look at your field notes. I think for the observation sheet, can be even more basic and just observe sections of the class and observe how the teacher intervenes, how the teacher works with the groups that you're observing, but how he or she basically how the teacher approaches each group, how the teacher interacts or intervenes with each group. And so you want to be situated, positioned where you can observe that, but you're going to be taking time. You're going to be looking at, for example, how long does the teacher spend with each group, if at all, what the teacher says, and how the students respond to the best of your ability. Now you're going to try to write out whatever you hear, but you're also going to have a recording device for each group. So you're going to catch all the details. So even if you don't get all the details, you just want to write down as much as you can, but not worry about missing a few words if you can't hear it, if one group happens to be on the other side of the room. So, but what you want to do is see basically how the teacher's interacting with that group. And for example, maybe the teacher intervenes and then talks to the whole group. Well, that's what you want to observe also, because even though you're only focusing on these two groups, you might include also those cases where the teacher maybe presents something to the whole group based on what he or she questioned or asked to that particular group. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So just think of something, and I've been basically telling everyone the same as far as their observation sheet, is one that's very simple. And these are just field notes. You're going to be basically just writing out what you see and describing it. But what I typically do is break it down into 3 sections, and you'll have your heading as you normally would.
May I take a pen?
Yeah,
Because
sure,
I forget
absolutely.
mine. I don't know what it is.
There you go. And I break it down into time, activity, and description. And so you just want to break it down into these sections, and you want to write out a beginning time. So let's say the teacher begins the class by calling out roll. You'll say, okay, 8 o'clock, maybe the activity's roll call. Not much for a description. The teacher's just calling roll. Let's say it takes 5 minutes. So 8:05, the teacher finishes. Now, the teacher then goes into the first activity. Maybe it's some sort of warm-up activity. Maybe it's a video, whatever. Maybe it's giving instructions. So you write out the time, and now it's 8:05 when the teacher begins this activity. And you want to give this activity a name. It doesn't really matter. Just you categorize these parts of a class however you like. And in the description, you're basically writing out what the teacher says, what the students say, what the teacher does, and what the students do. And you are just basically writing out continuously whatever you observe. If you notice some students are looking out the window, or if some students in the front happen to be appear to be on task, where the students in the back appear to be doing something else, you're basically observing as much as you can what you see. And you're going to continue in this fashion, so that when they finish this, maybe this activity lasts 15 minutes, so now it's 8:20, and then they begin another one, 8:21, and they start another activity. So you break this down, and in this description, there are going to be times, hopefully, then when they divide up in groups and they're working on their literature circles, again, you're going to be describing it and saying, okay, maybe you number the groups, group 1 or group A, group B, and you notice teacher walks over to group A, and the students ask the teacher a question, or and you're just basically describing what you see. Okay, and at the same time, at the bottom, you might indicate how the teacher's moving, with arrows or times, whatever notation system you want to use, but you want to try to notate how the teacher's being, or how the teacher's monitoring and walking around the room. So yeah, that's what I would recommend. Something a little bit more basic, and your observation sheet's going to be very basic. You're going to have the heading at the top, and you probably just have one set of time, activity, description, titles, and then leave space below, because you're not going to know how many of these sections you're going to ultimately need when you are observing. So I would just include one, and then you write it out the next time. Time, activity, description, and the corresponding times.
Okay.
Then once you have all of this, then you compare it with the recordings and use the information that you currently have in this sheet to then analyze what,
that
more
sheet
detail.
may be more appropriate for analyzing the recordings.
Right, and you can use this as an instrument. You can use this as an instrument, but I wouldn't call it an observation sheet. I would call it a group analysis sheet, or a group analysis guide, right? Because it's essentially helping you analyze the interactions, or
Inside
literature
the
circle analysis guide could also be. You title it however, whatever makes sense, but it would be more in terms of you observing or analyzing, rather, the recordings and your field notes, because remember, you're going to bring those two together. You need both of them. It's not just the recording, but it's the recording and the observation sheet, so that you can kind of piece things together, right?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Also, the observation sheet, I like that idea, but I may focus only on the teacher because it's the one I could observe, right?
You're focusing on the teacher, but you're also observing the students in the sense that what they say and what they do in general. Okay, in general. So you're looking at the two groups. You might say, and I know you're not focusing on all the students. So maybe you're focusing. Okay, you have Group A. You describe Group A moves up towards the front of the class. Group B goes in the back.
Mhm.
The teacher instructs them to go there, or they do it on their own. You're writing that out.
Mhm.
When a student asks a question to the whole group, because those are the questions you're going to be really recalling, those are something that you, basically whatever you can observe, okay? So there may be activities where you don't have a lot of description. There may be other times where you have a lot. But
that's why I'm keeping like
exactly, you don't know how much space you're going to need. And it's better to have too much than not enough. If you're there, I would just write everything. It's kind of just, don't worry about, in fact, don't analyze. Don't analyze about if one of them's a questioner, or I mean, that's all you're doing is observing. You're trying to write as much information down as possible in your field notes, so later when you go back to refer to your notes, you can recall better. You can recall as much as as much as you can. So it's basically just to help you recall later so that you can analyze.
Do I need the lesson plan at the same time or not? Just to focus? No. Oh, okay.
No, I don't think so, because you'll later use the lesson plan when you analyze.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not analyzing. When you step foot in that classroom, do not worry about analyzing, because that distracts you. All you're focusing on, I'm going to try to write down as much detail in writing as possible, so that you can go back and compare that with your audio recording or video, if you're doing a video, to, again, just to recall as much as you can. So don't worry about analyzing.
So it is important to try to write teachers' indications or commands to the whole group.
Yes. If the teacher writes something on the board, you write it down. If the teacher asks a question, to the best that you can, write out the question.
Mm-hmm.
If a student raises his or her hand and asks a question in front of the whole group, write that down. If you know a lot of the students are talking a lot, write that down. Okay, now you're not going to be able to write down what the students are feeling or what the teachers are feeling, but it's just your whatever you observe. It's not your interpretation, but it's what you observe, and it's things that are observable. You can't say students are paying attention. You can say students are maintaining eye contact. You can observe that. A student has his or her head on the desk with their eyes closed. You can observe that. You can observe if the student's sleeping. Because maybe the student's just like this, but not sleeping. See? So try to distinguish between things that you interpret versus things that you observe. And really, at this point, it's only what you observe. And since you're focusing on two particular groups, you probably are going to add more description about those two groups. But even if you have a little bit of information about other students asking questions, it's better to include it. Even though it's not the main focus of your study, it may come up. It's, again, you just want to recall as much as possible in your field notes. Okay? Yes. So this week, the idea here is try to finish up with our instruments. Try to finish the method section. There's no reflection due this week. But we have a 500-word method section, and I just uploaded an announcement, a video in Canvas for all of you to look at, explaining in detail what we need to try to finish this week for the method section. But all of the instruments, the instrument we're looking at here and all the instruments that we've been discussing over the last few weeks will need to be uploaded and included as an annex at the bottom of your thesis paper in Google Drive. In Google Drive, at the very end of your document, after your references, you have Appendix A, Appendix B. You'll need to include an instrument for each appendix. Each appendix will be on a separate page. So you'll have Appendix A, and in your instruments, you're going to be describing your instruments and referring to those instruments by saying see Appendix A in parentheses. So you're going to be describing, I will apply a questionnaire to teachers, see Appendix A. And you go down to Appendix A, and you should see a copy of your instrument, and so on. The lettering, the numbers, the letters of the appendix, Appendix A, B, and C, the order is going to be the order in which you present it in your documents. So the first instrument that you mentioned, that will be A, second, B, and so on. And that will be the order afterwards, or at the end of your document. So, now, one more thing before I forget. In the methods section, even though you haven't applied the procedure, you haven't applied the instruments, we're at the end. You're going to have you need to have it in the past tense. So if you're talking about the procedure and you're saying, first I applied this, I applied that, you're going to be talking in the past tense. Since you haven't applied it, and I'm asking that you complete it now before you apply it, for me, it doesn't matter if you do it first in the present tense and then go back and change it in the past tense, or if you want to stay in the past tense. I understand that you haven't applied it. Whatever, either way is fine with me. But I am looking at the specifics of each section. You should have one paragraph for each of the three sections. The method section first consists of the participants, then the instruments, and then the procedure. So you just will have a very concise but short paragraph for each of those three.
Participants,
instruments, and the procedure. When you go into your format, your template, the headings are already there. You don't have to change the headings. All you have to do is insert the text in each of those three sections. So that's what I'd like for you to work on. If things change later, that's fine. This is just for me too to see that you are looking at the context, the method, when you're developing these instruments, because that is what it's all about. You need to know who the participants are going to be. You need to know, obviously, the instruments, and you also need to know the way in which you're going to apply the instruments. The procedure section is how you're going to apply or collect your data, how you're going to apply the data. So think of the procedure as instructions. If someone were to apply or duplicate your study, explain to them in these sections what they would need to know to do the same step by step. And you'll include one or two sentences about analysis, but we'll talk a little bit about that later and add that to it later. But it's mainly talking about how you're applying your instruments. It's not, and this is a common mistake students make, is that in the procedure they talk about the activity, or how do I explain this? Not the way they collected the data, but the intervention, if they do an intervention, or the concept that they're now analyzing. So, for example, in your case, you're looking at literature circles. The process is not the process in which they applied the literature circles per se. It's not that. It's more how you applied the instruments. Now, there's some overlap, but the idea is that you are more focused on explaining how you applied the questionnaires, when did you apply the interviews, if you did a focus group, at which point did you do those. It's not so much you explaining the literature circles. First, the teacher did this with the literature circle, then they did this. Not so much, you don't feel you need to explain that in the procedure. You'll explain that a little bit later in the results when you are talking about the actual results of your study. But it's not so much the intervention as it is the way in which you're collecting your data. Now, there is some overlap. That's why it gets kind of confusing. But just think of it as, I have these instruments, how do I apply them? And I need to explain how I'm going to apply those instruments.
So pretty much it's like a researcher, like you are showing the procedure you follow, not the procedure of the teacher inside the observation of the class.
And that's a common mistake. Sometimes they explain all the procedure, only the intervention, or only the thing, the technique, or the strategy. But it's not so much that. It's the data collection procedure. Think of the method section as the how. It's like, how did you implement, and with whom did you implement your study? And that is
Mm-hmm.
what the method is trying to achieve. The method section should achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There has to be like a a balance between the paragraph, like certain number of words, like 150 or 70.
Yeah, I mean,
Or
more or
or is
less.
not important on this
Well,
part.
more or less, you're going to split it up into three sections. There's three sections, so you're going to have, as far as word count, is going to be approximately the same.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, yeah, I'm looking more to see that each section is precise,
Mm-hmm.
concise, and it contains all the information that you need. There's no theory involved. There's no citations unless you are using an instrument that someone else used. But there's no citations like regarding theory,
Mm-hmm.
right? Sometimes students write up, a lot in the method, and there's actual theory or citations related to theory. So it's only, some of you may not need any citations.
Mm-hmm.
If you are borrowing a procedure from someone else or you're borrowing an instrument from someone else, then yes, you will need citations.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not doing that, you won't need any citations.
Because I was thinking, and maybe I spent like 100 words talking about the participants and talking about the instruments and the procedure. I think that would take like 200 words for each part.
Yeah, I mean, more or less. I mean, I need to look at it to see what you write, but yeah,
Mhm.
that's as far as a general word count, that should do it. But again, every sentence has to be. There's no room for words that kind of fluff or It's all very concise, and every word has to be very informative. Every sentence has to be informative and really get to the point. So just that's what I'll be looking for and giving you feedback on in the method sections.
Mhm. Okay.
All right. So that's really what we're working on this week is trying to finish up the method section with the instruments, adding the instruments as appendix at the end, and yeah, so you can plan on next Monday to start the actual data collection.
Okay.
Make sure you have your permissions, whatever permission you need. If something in writing, make sure you have those if they're needed. I don't think you will need it here at the university if you're doing your research here, but and plan your time. We're gonna have about 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks or so for data collection. So as soon as you choose the teachers for your research, go to the teachers and plan as best you can the next 3 weeks. Say, okay, I'd like to plan these days at these times to do observations, interviews, etc.
Mm.
And then work very closely with the teacher. The communication needs to be very clear and open so that you're both on the same page and there are no problems with miscommunication. So do your best to schedule your time these next 3 weeks to make sure that you get the data that you need.
Okay.
All right.
Yes.
Any other questions, doubts?
Mm. So, well, as soon as the other teachers gave me the questionnaire, I will analyze the others and select my one participant.
Right.
And then, well, get together with the teacher and set up the dates.
Right.
Do I need to tell you which is the teacher or
No.
who is the teacher? Sorry.
No. Unless you have questions or you're not sure, there's no need to let me know. Just go ahead and contact that teacher and begin planning so that on Monday you can begin promptly collecting the data.
And can I measure? Can I mention that on the participants?
I'm sorry, if you can mention what?
I chose this teacher because of the initial questionnaire.
Yeah, you're going to be in the participant section. You're just going to talk about the teacher and the context of the class and the students, perhaps. In the procedure, you're going to be talking about first I applied questionnaire to eight teachers, and I chose this one teacher because this teacher answered this way
On the procedure.
in the procedure. Then I observed 3 classes and then observed after the 3rd class.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
That's the idea. The procedure probably won't be that long. I mean, you're probably going to have more information in the instruments and or the participants. It depends, but the actual procedure. Typically, it's pretty much evened out between those 3. I mean, if you have one sentence in one section, that's probably too short. But typically, those 3 sections are more or less the same amount of content.
Okay.
So we'll look at that, and I'll give you feedback on that next week.
Thank you, teacher.
You're welcome.
Amazing.
Thank you, you too. Hang in there. Don't forget your computer there.